This chapter is all about what we call the process of distinction, how some social categories have come to take on really significant meaning in life. This is done through this process of creating ways of dividing ourselves, others, stereotyping, and then ranking these categories. So, this table on my right is table 3.1 from the textbook. It is basically your guide to what you're going to be doing for this forum. You are going to pick an identity category, one of the things in the dark green column across the top. Pick one of these, or think about a different category that is significant to society, such as religious identity or immigration status. Then you're going to fill out the rest of the column for the identity that you've picked. So you're going to talk about how different elements of an identity are treated differently.
Most will use the way that the United States treats different categories. Be specific about how, when, and where people chose to start looking at the identity differently. Got it? One question from each column is already answered on table 3.1 as an example. If you choose a different identity, you will need to answer all of the questions. However, when did our society begin to really differentiate between the rights and statuses that immigrants have and those that non-immigrants have? You may need to do some background research on this, especially for the invention stage of this question. Then divide up the changes. How are we going about separating people into these groups? What are some stereotypes that we have developed as societies to talk about these groups' performance? How do we treat this identity in the United States? How about in the world? Are there ways in which, once we've heard those stereotypes, once we know that we are part of a particular gender or racial category, that we or others take action on it? That is one way of performing an identity based on stereotypes. Gender is a really easy one to think about because, the way that I cut my hair, the clothes that I choose to wear, those are things that I do to send signals about my gender identity in some way, right? However, this also depends on racial identity and religious identity as well. Do I wear symbols of my faith? Do I wear a specific brand name? Or are all of my clothes second-hand? Do I carry a purse or handbag? Many stereotypes affect how gender is portrayed.
How strange is it to hear my voice from this person? Men are supposed to sound one way and women another, right? That is an example of distinction based on gender. Do I pray 5 times a day at certain times of day? Do I behave in certain ways to embody for myself and for others what my religious faith might be? How does contemporary United States society elevate some subcategories within your chosen identity over others? So, your job is to basically fill out one column of this chart with your own perceptions about a specific distinction. A couple of tips to think about while you're thinking about this assignment. Social class is another distinction, with many examples showing how people act differently. Remember that you may have personal experience that you can bring to this, especially when you think about well-known common stereotypes in the world. You will still need some outside systemic research to corroborate or show examples of that some of this stuff, for example, historical invention, happens. For ranking, don't just assume everybody knows this or acts the same way. This is where you need to think outside of your experience. If you can, try to find a statistic, a research study, or something that reaffirms the different ways in which some subgroups within this category have more opportunities than others. When you have reliable data, it makes a stronger post. You don't have to explain every single example, right? You need to just give me one really good example for each stage of the process. Remember too, if we're talking about a category like age in your post, you need to have different age groups. You can't have everything be about being teenagers, right? You should talk about children in one, adults in another, teenagers maybe in a third, and the elderly in yet a fourth category. Like across these, you should use multiple examples. Again, it doesn't have to be exhaustive or perfect. A few examples of an identity is fine. You don't need every example for this assignment. If we try to use every single religious identity that existed in the United States, you wouldn't be able to finish this assignment, right? However, you need to make sure that you're not just focusing on one subgroup within that broader identity category. This one is a little more intense or involved because your post needs a separate paragraph for invent, divide, stereotype, perform, and rank. This is the process for any category, so don't hesitate to reach out to your instructor if you have any questions about how to proceed. Remember too that this assignment absolutely requires you to take a look at someone else's post and respond. Get your first post in by Friday, so your classmates have time to create their replies. When you're responding, make sure you answer the questions in the assignment instructions prompt. Don't just say, "Hey, you did a great job." Make sure that you are responding to the specific questions in the instructions for replies and talking about the relationship between what they're talking about and the sort of vocabulary around status that comes up in Chapter 3. Thanks, and good luck. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to explore these concepts of difference a little more deeply